like to introduce you to Donal, and Donal will tell you a little bit about himself. So welcome, Donal, and over to you.
Okay, thanks very much, Janet. I'm Donal Carroll. Technology, isn't it wonderful? Somebody said that IT actually stands for in trouble. But welcome to everyone, and thanks for joining us. Briefly, myself, my background, I left school early, did an apprenticeship, went to college as a mature student, ended up teaching and was head of teacher training. And there I developed a learning culture to make independent adults, and critical independent learning culture for adults. And when I got made redundant, I formed Critical Difference about 15, 16 years ago, whose aim was to bring new ideas to old problems for better outcomes. And I asked the question, if we can develop independent individuals, what will that look like in organizations? So that was my difference, my unique selling point, if you like, for consultancy, how to make organizations independent. And those themes will emerge through the book and this session. By the way, seeing as one of the titles of one of the parts of the book is the learning model, this particular type of learning we're using, I've criticized in the book as sort of taxidermist, because it seems to be one way. It's the opposite of what we'd normally use, but let's be as interactive as we can. And that's a little bit of background. Can I give you a possible aim for this session, which is to identify the key ideas in the book, Managing Value, New Learning, Management and Business Models, and how these can apply to your organization so it can reach its next stage of development faster. The claim is that if you use these models, depending on your current performance, you'll reach your next stage of development faster. That's the claim, and there's some evidence in the book, but of course, we have to see what your current performance is first. Okay, is that okay as an intro? All right.
That's perfect. Thank you, Donal. I've just put up your slide, what they said about managing value. So if you want to carry on, that's fine.
What I'd normally ask here is, what do you read? What management and business books do you read? I'm guessing everybody does. And whether they excite you, stimulate you, or whether you think most of it's chloroform in print. Here's some things that were said about managing value, both by participants, reviewers, and so on. And you can see more of these in some YouTube videos, which I've put in as a link in some of the materials that I've sent to Janet, who will send on to you, which is 10 innovations in the book with all the links. So would this look like a book you would read? Would you read it? Does it sound a little bit different? Its premise, by the way, is that if we want to transform management, it's a 100-year-old model now, then we also need to transform management writing and take more risks in it, sort of risks we're always asking organizations to take. So I hope that would stimulate you, and let's have a look at the next slide.
We're there, Donal, so do carry on.
Okay,
yeah.
That's the book, and you'll notice there's a logo on the front, which is 1512, which is testing one idea in 5 organizations over 1 year through 2 journeys, that of the writer and the ideas themselves. I've tried to be as inventive as I can, as innovative in both form and content in this, so that it has a lot of intellectual playfulness in it. I mean, for example, it has organizational debt, the cost of trustlessness. It has organizational cross-dressers, the way problems appear, they're never what they actually seem. It has organizational orphans, productive interference, second argument, facing down Facebook. It's got a lot of things in it that would be, I hope, animating and a little bit more interesting than the ordinary, as I say, imagination-skewered business and management writing. Okay.
We've moved on, Donal. Yeah.
Okay. Now, here's a question for you. What's your experience of customer service over the last 10 years? Has it got better or worse? And would you just take a quick poll on this, I guess, Janet?
Yes, that's fine. If you just bear with me, I'll pop the poll up, but if you'd like to carry on, Donal, while I open the poll.
Okay, do that. And as you can probably see from this slide, though we're asking you this question, I've made the point that as customers we are always shopping for the best models, but they're quite implicit in what we, how they're constructed and what we receive, whether it's a service or a product. And I'd like to come back to that a little bit later on. So bear in mind that when we go shopping, we're also shopping for models, which is stuff.
That's interesting, actually. I know exactly what you mean by that, Donal. Yes, you sort of, we want the next best thing. You know, I think phones are a classic example, aren't they? So everybody wanting the next best thing in their phones.
Yeah.
I'm just waiting for the poll to finish. There's a few people just still remaining to do it, but and it's looking quite interesting, actually. It's more split than I thought it would be. So yes, I mean, I would have guessed that people would have said it's declining, but actually that doesn't seem to be the case. So well, I'll just close the poll and give the few people a chance to finish. I'm sorry, that was quite a quick poll, folks, but we just wanted to do it quickly. So just a couple more seconds. Apologies for this, folks.
Not at all.
It's taking a little longer. So, okay, we've got the poll results in, which hopefully people can see now. But if you can't see them, the experience says improving 28%, declining 28%, and 11% have said remaining the same. And there's 33% people, I don't think we gave them enough time to answer, so apologies to those people. But okay, Donal.
Can I leave that there, because I'd like to come back to it and explain what this shopping for the best models is.
Sure. Okay. Shall I move on to the next slide?
Now, this is the first the first model. Models are just metaphors for the way we think about particular things, and it's to try and reveal the thinking behind the thinking. So I guess anybody who's with us will have their own management model, and I've defined this as the choices made about how organizational effort is organized, the how of business. And there's a poll there again. Do you know yours, and how effective is it? Do you want to comment on that?
I have opened the poll, Donald, but if we'd like to give people a bit longer to do this one this time, so if you'd like to carry on explaining.
Okay. The management model is that the traditional management model is around 100 years old. Its conventional appearance is through command and control and top-down and hierarchical and so on. But there's plenty of evidence from pretty well everything you'd read that this has failed. It's led to distrust, disengagement, poor performance, and so on. And there's a recent article by Simon Corkin in the FT. Corkin wrote the foreword for the book, My Book, Managing Value. He's the business journalist of the year 3 times over, a radical journalist, quite, very well read. Anyway, his research showed that in recent Gallup polls, they're conducted every year around, what's his phrase is, that according to the latest Gallup poll, State of the Workforce Survey, 13% of employees come to work each day emotionally invested in the organization and focused on doing a good job. The rest are either passive or negative. That's 13%. So the conventional management model, which is the one I'm criticizing, has well and truly failed. So we need to transform that. And the management model I've got here, by the way, for those who are with us, an outline of the 3 models will be coming your way after this from Janet. And the management model that I've taken is, it's in the form of a grid, and it looks like it's managing direction, managing means, and managing capacity. And on the one side, it has fairly standard principles of these, which are hierarchy, bureaucracy, and today. And what I've done is I've paralleled these with a movement to the other side, which is based on moving from more control to more trust, so from hierarchy to collective wisdom, bureaucracy to emergence, and from today to tomorrow. And what it's asking is, and which explains all those terms, as you'll see, how is your organization managed? Are you interested in consolidating hierarchy without any collective wisdom? Is it bureaucratic without any emergent learning? Is it focused on today rather than tomorrow? And what's the effect of all these general tendencies? Is it static or is it agile? Because broadly what we need to be heading is towards agility. So the organizations I work with fill these in to see where they are now and where they wanted to be in about 5 years' time.
Sorry to interrupt you, Donal, but we've got the poll results in if you'd like to know them. For the management model, the choice is made about how organisational effort is organised, the how of business, and do you know yours? 56% know theirs, 17% don't know, and 28% didn't answer. For how effective is it? Good, there was 25%, poor, 8%, and 36% of people didn't know. So those are the poll results for that. Would you like me to move on to the next slide?
Yeah, just before you do that, some of the examples of a more progressive, empowering, and interesting management model are for companies like Happy, Matt Black, Semco, and Morningstar, the big food processing company in America. They've moved over to a much more agile one. But yes, let's have a look at the next model.
Okay. And in this poll, you're asking people about the choices made about how organisational value is created, delivered, and captured. The what, why of business. So I've just opened that poll, so we'll give people a little bit of a chance to answer that while you talk through it, Donal.
Okay. The business model here is how value is created for the customer, the organization, the community, shareholders, and so on. I've taken quite a few examples of business models from in the book. One is the famous Workers' Beer Company one, which enabled people to get to festivals like Glastonbury for free by contributing their labour, but that would go to an identified cause. And I have a number of particular business models that have enabled themselves to challenge the conventional one of simply profit-making. And let me just find these. And they are the Big Issue is one, which has a business model of giving a hand up, not a handout. Radiohead, which adopted a business model of freemium, which blends free basic services with paid more advanced premium services. Zopa, the peer-to-peer lending group, which is now 2% of the personal lending industry, if you like. And their business model is everybody wins except the fat cats. And a few more like Hexahert, which is simplified disaster relief shelter designs, and its business model is open source. So what I'm suggesting is that business models can create and capture value in different ways, but companies which don't renew or recognize overly mature ones, like there's plenty of them around, HMV, Jessup, Sony, Kodak, Nokia, and so on, where they were not creating value anymore, or indeed were working through symptoms like, for example, failure demand, where a lot of their energy was spent in redeeming failure where things weren't got right the first time. Also, the flexibility of business models where customers can negotiate to a certain extent what value they're being given from organizations. I'm talking when things get a little bit more. You simply want a pair of scissors or a bucket or something like that, where there's some sort of complex negotiation which interacts between the value the company thinks it's giving and the value the company is actually receiving. So a lot of the time what companies think they're selling are not what customers think they're receiving. So it's worth going back to that and seeing, I'm asking the question again in this tool, which was used as a self-assessment tool, do staff know what their business model is, and the evidence is that the more they do, the more successful the company is. Of course, they can influence
well,
there as well.
That ties in nicely, Donal, with the poll results, because 60% of our audience today know what theirs is.
Okay.
9% don't know, so that's a good answer. A lot of you seem to know. How effective it is, 29% have said it's good, 17% have said poor, and 20% have said they don't know.
Okay. Well, the interesting thing is for the people who think it's poor or they don't know, which is how to transform that and to ask the question, how can we get to our next stage of development if it is poor? So if that needs amending or transforming, then who's going to do it? And what's your evidence for it and so on? That's interesting. Okay. Will we try the next?
So would you like to move on to the learning model now?
Now, this is the key one, because what I'm claiming is the learning model, the choice is made about how organizational thinking is mobilized, but what best next. This is instrumental in enabling both the management and the business model to be changed. So there's a question there. What's yours? Do you know it? And how effective is it? Shall we get that poll going?
Yes, I've started the poll already, and people are already answering, Donal, so they're very keen to answer.
Okay. Okay. Well, this learning model is absolutely key, because it's really asking, it's moving from the old-fashioned questions of how many people work here to how many people think here. And the model, which again you've got an outline coming after this from Janet, is based on, what's it based on? Here we are. Again, it's a grid that was used by the companies, the 5 organizations, to self-assess. Is your focus for learning individual or collective? What are your sources of learning, traditional or emergent? And what type of learning, is it superficial or deep? And what are the effects of each of these particular types of learning? Is it asphyxiation or is it resilience? Because resilience is really what you should be heading for. And it's asking, for instance, not just what is individual learning, but what is collective learning. And there's a range of questions which people can answer on this and indeed the other models. There's a couple of others. Can I go on to the next slide?
You can indeed, Donal. I'll move on. Yes, we can also close the poll if you like. I think most people have actually answered, so I'll close the poll and put up the results.
Okay.
Just bear with me. I'm just putting those up. So the poll results are that the people who know theirs is 52%, 27% don't know. How effective is it? Good, 21%, poor, 15%, and 39% don't know. So that will tell you a bit about our
good was
audience.
1%, poor was?
The good was 21%.
Yeah. Poor
was 15%,
right.
And 39% didn't know. So
I wonder what the implications of that is. Can I take that up a little bit further along, sure, and going back to the shopping for models as well? Okay, here's the next slide. If I was in front of a group, I could ask this more easily. What's the most important single factor influencing learning? What is it? And again, a task, what image would depict your day of learning in an organization? Can I look at the image first, if that's all right?
You want me to go on? Yes.
Yeah, you can see here there's a sponge. I put a sponge up because somebody characterized Mark Zuckerberg, the chief of Facebook, as a learning sponge. And what they mean is he had a high ask-to-talk ratio. He asked more questions in any given conversation. And I was thinking, learning's got to be a little bit more difficult than just being a sponge, which you absorb endlessly. That wasn't terribly, and I suggest learning is automatic and it doesn't need a bit of critical thinking and so on. So I'm suggesting a sponge might not be the ideal image. I haven't had a chance to see what the images you would select, this group. But let's have a look at the next one. Here's another image.
Actually, Donald, before we move on, I was just going to ask Christina if we've got any questions from here on in.
Janet, we don't have currently any questions.
Okay, thank you, Christina. I have just got one question, Donald, before we move on. Would you say that that managers can, because we're talking a lot about organisations here and how they can change the learning and the models. If you work for a large organisation, obviously it's difficult sometimes for managers to influence the whole organisational thinking. Can managers use your ideas and models within their teams?
They can do. That's a good question. They can do individually, and they can adopt and create a culture in their own section or their own unit. But the models I'm talking about are whole organizational ones. Eventually, whatever those managers do, if it cuts across or contravenes the dominant models, it will lead to conflict. And now that can only be productive, because if they're talking about what should our models be, and there's evidence that they're not working at this stage, then if that unit is developing models where they are more, there's higher performance, better customer satisfaction and community satisfaction, then it is indeed the source of what I call fecund conversation, something worthwhile having between that unit and the organization as a whole. So they certainly can influence it, but they should be aware that it will lead to deeper, more challenging conversations within the organization.
Thank you very much, Donal. I've just moved on to your next slide, which I think ties in nicely with my question, actually.
Okay. What I'm suggesting here is this is actually a better image of organizational collective learning. It's a porcupine. And notice how well defended it is. I mean, and it goes back to the question on a couple of slides back, which was, what's the most important single factor influencing learning? It's what the learner already knows. So one of the problems is that if we're experiencing new problems and challenges, the tendency is to respond to it with what our habits are and what we already know. So it's a sort of a painless solution that we're looking for. But in fact, that isn't going to work. And probably the learning model and possibly the other models need complete transforming. So this means somebody getting in behind the defenses of the organization. Our Gyrus call these defensive routines. Well, when put together in an organization as a whole, they're very, very powerful. But their aim is to service the management model and the business model. So if there isn't an explicit learning model, and in many companies there isn't, or if it's very traditional, then the learning model needs to be made much more explicit, because it needs to lead both the management model and the business model. And it needs to be obviously far more open than our friend the porcupine. And if I can move you on to the next visual image.
I've just moved on.
The learning model for change, risk is needed, around the faster learning. This is a rather silly man. He's jumping with a briefcase. I mean, when I show this to people, when I was talking about the book, they said if that was a woman, she'd spend quite a bit of time bringing the two sides of the bridge together before she jumped, and she wouldn't have, a briefcase and so on. But what I was trying to symbolize was that risk is needed if one is moving into uncharted territory, that you don't quite know what's going to happen, but you have to do something. Do something by all means, but just increase your rate of learning and have some productive interference between individual and collective learning. I've looked quite a bit at the relationship between individuals and groups in organizations in the book. And without this sense of risk, no, we don't know what the answer is, but we know we can't stay where we are. And that's quite an animating push. Is that a tautology? That should animate people. So risk is needed, but chart is a little bit more than that. By the way, a higher risk is staying where you are, because the gap between where you are now and where you want to be, where you're trying to get to in the leap, gets wider and more muscly, and the defences of the porcupine get more muscular all the time.
Okay, Donal, I'm moving on the slide now.
That's okay, all right. Now, the learning model, just a couple of things. These are the things that managers and staff said in the 5 organisations. How can things be more certain? Learning is an anagram for difficulty. I worked with 5 organisations, 1 selling on for a couple of million, 1 starting and 3 established. The one that was selling on was bought because it had these 3 models working very, very effectively. It was high performance. And this is common from one of the managers in it. Working hard is the simplest form of laziness. And it's habit forming and defensive, whereas really what we want to be doing is saying, is this the best way of working? Is this the best way to achieve our goals? What does it actually mean for our practices and processes? And what I did was, in the learning model, again, which is coming your way after this, it needs to be radical in role and in design. And by in role, I mean leading organizational thinking. So it's not the management model, i.e. like in the banks or the funding, the funding banks make more money and so on, like the JP Morgan Chase is a good example. In the absence of a learning model, all sorts of things tend to happen. And some examples I've used are the Baby P and the Lehman Brothers, the Lehman Brothers issue, which started the banking crisis in 2008-9 and so on, where there was an absence of a learning model. And its role in design is to move learning from individual to collective, from traditional to emergent, and from superficial to deep. So it builds up resilience. And all those examples in their explanation will be in the materials which are coming your way. In that way, it's a midwife for change. But it has to actually lead the management and the business model. What I've said, I've taken some examples that, like in quantum physics, the most flexible part of a system ends up controlling it. And that's what learning should be in an organization. But it can't be unconscious. It can't be implicit. It can't just be training or sheep dip procedures where everybody goes off for the same thing. So it needs to be learning conscious learning. And in that, the phrase I used was significant learning, because as there are no painless solutions, it's painful, it's turbulent, it knocks things over, it misaligns the system, it leads to a great deal of uncertainty. But following it through and staying with it will mean that one is more resilient. But learning light, what we have at the moment, simply won't do. Okay. Now,
shall I move on?
Please, yeah.
Okay, moved on.
If I've made a bit of sense so far, they're interdependent and interconnected. This is a BA. I worked for 10 years on the MBA, Creativity, Innovation and Change MBA unit, and we had this cartoon which was, if you think you have a tame problem, start examining it and it'll soon draw out more wicked ones in its wake. But what I'm saying here is that in shopping for the best models, if you, for example, if you go into a shop, I'll just give you an example. I went into JB Sports recently down here at Clapham Junction. I said, I'd like that T-shirt. And the guy said, terribly sorry, sir, we haven't got it. And that was it. So he was working simply at the management model. He was managing staff and customers in the shop, and that was all. I went by comparison to Starbucks. I know, I just went in there to fill in my tax forms rather loudly. And the member staff said, can I put your name on the coffee mug? It seemed a nice gesture, a fleeting familiarity in a globalized world. But something else was going on. This was a form of engagement, a form of saying yes, is there anything I can do for you, and so on. And what was happening was, in the first one, they were functioning only at one model, the management model. In the second one, they were functioning at the management model, the business model, and also the learning model, improving service all the time. So the 3 models are actually integrated. And where they're not, you'll probably get bad service. And behind whatever we ask for or we request from producers or services are these 3 models. And one will soon know, for example, when we experience the best models. They're implicit, they happen automatically, and they're all together. Like, I don't know if anybody received service from Zappos, for instance, the retail and shoe firm in America. I mean, they have the best customer service, and they've gone over to a completely self-managing staff model, and so on. So behind every transaction is some sort of our models, business management and learning ones, integrated and implicit. So the next time you're experiencing service, have a look at what you think is there. They think the providers are actually working to what models are being manifested in your experience. Okay.
Right, I've moved on, Donal, so you're ready with the next slide.
Okay.
That's the value-creating research method inquiry approach.
Yeah, sorry, this sounds incredibly clumsy. It's just the method that I used. First of all, I had to innovate a method because a lot of the methods were incredibly academic and built up a huge scaffolding around a house. And when you got to the top floor of the house, you got in this building and thought, oh, I think we've been here before. Why are we here? I don't know if you'd recognize that quote. It's research into organizations, a ponderous confirmation of the obvious, weighty investigation of trivia. I could ask you who that's by, but I'll tell you, it's Charles Handy in Understanding Organizations. I know it's a while back, but his point was that a lot of business and management writing just leads to reproduced safety. Very little risk in it, very little new, or it's dressed up in different language, more flowery language, and so on. And I wanted something different, because what I was claiming was the traditional models generate dependence, like the business model, you know, you can have it in any color as long as it's black, or the management model, well, I'll tell you what to do and only the manager knows, or the learning model where staff are supposed to consume learning as opposed to being asked what learning they can produce in order to improve it. So that leads to a phenomenon like, when I grow up, I want to be spoon-fed, tell me what to think, tell me what to do, and so on. And then just something that I used in the book Tradition is what we call something that doesn't work anymore. And I'm claiming that 3 traditional models didn't work, therefore needed reinventing. This method, by the way, is designed to enable the organizations to use it themselves. If I can just show you the next slide.
Yes, I'm moving on now, Donal. Here we go.
Okay, a soft yes. This is, when I was working on the MBA, I used to, or in consultancy, I would ask managers, how often do you say yes, and how often do you say no to suggestions for improvement from subordinates, or indeed anybody else? And they said, oh, all the time, all the time. So then I asked them to take a diary and note it, and then come back the next time and tell us how often that was. And it was far less yes and far more no. And they were becoming much more aware. Their staff, of course, would be. So what I was trying to do was get a model of research where people could start imperfectly and start where they were at the moment, rather than waiting for, you know, the good clean call from the academics or the consultants. As long as they could increase their rate of learning and use their learning model. A soft yes means that if somebody approaches you as a manager, you're a context maker and have a lot more power, obviously. So you leave them with a little bit more than the conversation started with, and it functions at an emotional level. Even if you think what they're saying is a little bit odd, you could always say, well, I'd ask you this if we were at a face-to-face meeting, but, well, can you develop it? Can you get more evidence? Can you grow it a little bit more? Can you come back with something more? Just to lead them with 5% more rather than a no, which is one of the most disempowering, one of the ways managers have of traditionally manifesting power is obviously to say no. And it just happens, the reason for courses like the MBA in Creativity, Innovation and Change is that it happens a lot of the time. The method also, it's designed to generate independence so we can do it ourselves. It encourages organizations to start imperfectly and start now. You don't have to wait. There's quite a bit in this about be an Imagineer, imagine a future you don't have, and so on. But just start asking questions. And I've quoted one of the best ways of self-leading is to ask meaningful questions. So that's the method, which is also innovative.
Donal, I'd just like to ask Christina at this point if we've got any questions. I've got something I'd like to ask, but Christina may have got something from our attendees.
Yeah.
Hi, Janet. We don't have any questions that have come through.
Okay. I've got one quick question, Donal. Thank you, Christina. I have to say, I love the idea of a manager asking for ideas and saying to somebody, go off, find out if it will work. But at what stage do you have to say, oh, actually, this is probably going to be a waste of time? You know, should you let this person, as a manager, let this person waste their time investigating something that you're fairly confident won't work, or should you just let it go because it might lead to something else?
Well, the title of the method is value creating. So if the manager thinks that, then they need to have a conversation, however brief, with the person who's bringing the ideas and saying, are you sure, in what way, and give a little bit of guidance, but free them up a little bit more so that the member of staff themselves thinks, if I go about it in this way, it won't be very useful, but if I look at it from another direction, it might be more useful. But no, it's not to free everything up. But unless one frees one, you won't free 100, if you know what I mean. And I would think looking at things differently. If we had a flip chart here, I'd put the word stressed on the board. People probably know this technique, and I'd ask people how they get over. How do you get over stress? STRESSED. And if you look at it backwards, it's desserts. Yeah. So any frame which takes us out of our current tram lines of thinking to see something slightly differently, which we can imagine differently, would be a useful starting point. So instead of looking at it this way, could you look at it another way? The point is, the more one says no, the less people are likely to think differently and think improvement-wise.
Thank you, Donal. Yeah, I don't mean to rush you, but I think we might need to move on. I'm keeping an eye on the time, and we're running out of time. So I'm going to move you on to the next slide, if that's okay.
Okay. Well, some things that organizations said, you'll hear things you don't want to, and what it enabled them to do, make choices about their models, and so on. And one at the end there, managing value is career coaching, but for organizations. People are going to have these slides, aren't they? We're sending them on as well. Is that right, Janet?
Yes.
Yeah,
yes,
okay.
They will do, yes.
Okay.
Yeah, they'll have the slides to refer to. I'll send them out, yeah.
Okay, and the next one is how to use the three models. I realize you just had a very, very brief outline, and I realize I also don't know what you're thinking or whether I've made sense or not. I hope I have. But this is how you would use them by going through that sequence. What's my next stage of development? Can it meet current and future challenges? Then what are my three models, and in what way do they need to be amended or not to meet those current and future challenges? So it's a chance to, if you don't know what they are, to identify them, their value, and what would be appropriate models for your future. How do you get management agility, learning resilience, and business growth? Okay.
Okay, I'm moving on to the next slide now, Donal. So,
in terms of time, then,
you've still got enough time.
Managing value is useful for you if you want to reach your next stage of development fast. If your organization is spoiled for choice, you can't see the chance. We haven't got time to think, yet we have time to do things badly, and so on. So we haven't actually identified a specific management business or learning model. So choose yours so you live on purpose. Want to have a healthy threesome? That's where the three interconnect in an interdependent way. Suffer from collapsonomics? That's where we think everything's in change, but what isn't is our need to engage with our staff, customers, markets, and community. Need a method which is value creating. That's the one I've been talking about, starting with a soft yes. And you need to be entertained by different types of ideas. And that comment about managing value being being entertained is from Julian Birkinshaw, the Professor of International Strategy at the London Business School, and he's on the YouTube video saying that. So I hope that's useful, and I hope you've got some ideas from it. And can I say to just
very much, Donal.
Final point to the people there that if there's any way critical difference can help, there's our details. If you want us to come see or talk about it a bit more, and look at the three materials that we're sending you, the slides, the innovations, and the links to podcasts, and also the models. Do get back to me, please.
Okay, thank you very much, Donal. I have got one quick question for you. I just wondered, as you travel around to all these different organisations and the various sectors, do you find that there are some more resilient to the new models than others?
Good question, yes. But at the same time, I made a classic mistake of giving the organisations the models and saying, oh, get on with this, fill them in. And they said, this is language on stilts, it's management rubbish. And chloroform in print, I think one of them said. So it took me about 6 months to realize I was pushing the wrong questions. So then I asked them, okay, what is your next stage of development? And they said, that's easy. We'll just produce more of the same. I said, I don't think that's a development. And that began a much more fruitful, open-ended conversation about where they are now. And then I could use the models to identify their current performance and stage. And all of their models were a mixture of traditional and slightly more emergent, but all of them needed to have much more explicit models. The most successful one had 3 explicit ones. The least successful one had all inherited default ones, which simply didn't work anymore. And it was easy then to get them to choose the models that they would actually wanted. That is the purpose of the models, for example. So the greater there is, I didn't meet hard-boiled resistance in the sense that we're doing fine, because they all knew that the challenges coming up in their strategic landscapes, whatever the sector was, whether it's third, private or charities, were greater than the capacity to meet them. So that gave me some second ground for deeper conversations.
Well, that's wonderful. Thank you very much, Donal. And I think we're just about out of time now. So I'd just like to thank everybody who joined us and let you all go off and enjoy the rest of your lunch hour. And thank you very